I'd like to welcome you to our class tonight. We're on page 37 in our book. That's lesson number 8. And there was some really good material in this book, and I've used a lot of it, but I've supplemented with some of the material that I had. So we will look at this lesson on stewardship of money and material things, lesson number 8. Before we begin, James is going to lead us in a prayer. Amen. I have certainly enjoyed this study so far, and I hope you have, because the things we've looked at really are just so pertinent to all of us. And if this lesson hit us, then we're not normal, because we all have to deal with money. We have to deal with material things. We have to deal with jobs and securing things that are necessary for life. All that involves money. You understand that? Material things, money. Society where if you don't have the money to get it, what do? You borrow it, get it. Stories told of a little boy that went to the store with his mother, and she took her items up to the counter, and the man at the counter, he said, "Charge it." And that's what we do is too often. And there's nothing wrong with charging things. I charge cards, but I don't pay interest. And I like using their money, so I'm glad to be able to do that. Stewardship of material things. The Bible contains 350 verses on money and possessions, and you know, having a lot of material for class. But this is just almost overwhelming. In fact, I had asked Brother Don in this class, and of course, you know, he's still in the hospital, not doing well, been sick, and hopefully will be out soon. We sure hope so. But I didn't start looking at this lesson till Monday, and I thought, boy, I'm glad I didn't start looking at it till Monday, because if I started last week, there's no telling how much material I would have had. We probably won't cover all the material that I have. Anyway, I have 9 pages of notes for this lesson. We would probably had 20 pages if I'd started last week. But I want you to compare this to some other things that you might find in the Bible. 2,350 verses on money and possessions. And by the way, that figure comes from Dr. Stan Bullington, professor of engineering, has a PhD in engineering, teaches at Mississippi State University, and a member of the church. And he wrote a book called Solomon on Wealth, and you can get that off the internet. You can get it off of Amazon if you're interested in it. A lot of great material. So there's a lot of verses about money and possessions, but only about 500 verses on prayer and about 500 verses on faith. 70% of Americans live from paycheck to paycheck. That means that most Americans don't save money. They spend money. Almost 2 million bankruptcies take place every year in the United States. That's an old figure, it may be more than that. 70% of divorcing couples argue over finances. When I was in college, one of the papers I wrote for a class was called Money Matters in Marriage. I thought that was an interesting play on word. Money matters in marriage, or money matters in marriage. And it does. And it certainly has an effect on marriages. So there are a number of biblical subjects related to money. If you were to look through the Bible and look up those 2,000 or 3,000 verses, you would find things that dealt with budgeting, business, or contentment, debt, getting rich quick, we're warned about that, giving, investing, lending, warned about the love of money, planning provision, prospering, receiving, saving, stewardship, which is the overriding thing that we're looking at in this class tonight, success, waste, and work and worry. So those are just some of the areas that the Bible deals with as far as related to money. The first thing in the book was problems Christians face with money. And I guess the first point I should have said is indebtedness. One of the great problems with Christians facing problems with money is indebtedness. And there are some staggering statistics about all of that, and I'll share some of those with you. Americans have 986 billion in credit card debt. Talked to Don a couple of days ago, and he said that number is now over $1 trillion. Over $1 trillion in credit card debt. The average household credit card debt is $6,473. That's $1,300 per year in interest. And that may be an old figure, because post-COVID changed indebtedness drastically, astronomically. 55% of Americans carry a monthly credit card debt. Credit card debt increased 42% during the COVID pandemic. Why do you suppose that happened? We won't spend much time on it, but just a couple ideas.
A lot of people quit going to work.
A lot of people quit working.
But they still had to eat and have
But
everything.
they still had to eat. What? And people, boredom. They wanted something to do. Yeah. Home improvement projects went through the roof during that particular period of time. So they still wanted to spend money. They may not have been bringing it in. A lot of people were working from home. A lot of people quit their jobs, but they didn't quit eating. They kept spending money. Our nation is in debt to the tune of $31.46 trillion. Why? Bad management. Let me ask you, does everybody in here have to balance their checkbook? Well, some of you may not, because you depend on the bank, and the bank's right. But my wife balances that book every month. We have to balance our budget in our homes, in our cities, in our counties, in our state. Why not our federal government?
Just increase the borrowing.
Just increase. And what are they talking about right now? What's going to happen next week? I'm so glad my Social Security check comes in on the fourth Wednesday of the month, which is today. And I got it, because next week, guess what? There may not be any checks. We're warned about all that, because the president and Congress can't get together, because the president wants to spend more money and Congress says, no, we need to cut back. They start trying to balance budgets. Average new car payment is $716. Average used car payment is $413. Average monthly mortgage in America is $1,679. Average American carries a debt balance of $96,371, and you add to it your share of the $31.46 trillion, which is another $10,000 per person, if I figure that right. So, are we living above our means in this country as a nation?
Yes.
Yeah, everybody is. Yes, absolutely. We sure are. So let's look at some of the other things that we find out in the Bible about problems with money. Turn over to Proverbs 15, verse 27. The first problem I mentioned here is greed. Proverbs 15 at verse 27. Proverbs 15 at verse 27. Colby, do you have that for me?
He who profits illicitly troubles his own house, but he who hates bribes will live.
All right, Colby's got that strange version. Somebody else read it.
He that is greedy of gain troubles his own house.
Thank you. So we got that greedy word, and we got that in two different translations, King James, New King James. Just picking at you, Colby. I was looking for the word greed. Yours didn't have it, and that's the reason I said that. Okay, Ecclesiastes 5, verse 10. Somebody get that for me right quick. Ecclesiastes 5, verse 10.
He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity.
I don't like that translation. Somebody else read it.
He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity.
Thank you. Not that I didn't like it. He didn't have what I had. Okay. And he who loves silver will not be satisfied with what? Silver. Why can't you be satisfied?
You already got it.
You already got it. There is this word called covetous, and we're going to get to that. But he who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, or he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. And what that says is that if you're wrapped up in materialism, you got to keep doing what? Fueling the fire, right? More. And then trusting in riches. 1 Timothy 6, verses 19 through 20, 17 through 19. Somebody get that for me. 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19. And I'll take any translation you got. Even John's.
There you go. Instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or to fix their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed.
Okay. So why should we not trust in riches?
They're uncertain.
It is uncertain. You can't bank on it, can you? Yeah. A friend of mine one time told me, said, I'm preaching a sermon Sunday about you. And I said, about me? And I said, what is? He says, I'm preaching on the, uncertainty of riches or something to that effect, you know. He tied that in some way. But riches are uncertain. You can't bank on what you don't have. In fact, you might not even be able to bank on what you have. If you've got any money invested, you know what I'm talking about. You've seen what's happened over the last year and a half, 2 years, how the market's kind of tanked for you. Folks that have worked all their lives, put their money in a 401k to support them during their retirement years, have seen perhaps 30% of their retirement gone. So you just can't depend on it. But what should the trust be in? God. And the living God who gives us richly all things to enjoy. So what should we do then with the riches that we have according to this passage? do good works, ready to give, that's willingness to share, and storing up for themselves a good foundation for the time to come, that they may lay hold of in the life. Another problem that Christians face when it comes to money is seduction of things that money can buy. And I think that's a dangerous thing for us. We need to be careful about that. Again, 1 Timothy chapter 6, look at verses 9 and 10. Somebody read that for me, please.
But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and snare, many foolish and harmful love, which drown in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows.
So again, here he mentions greediness. We mentioned that earlier up there. He talks about greediness and the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Love of money is not evil. It is the root of all kinds of evil, he says. You need to put those qualifiers in. Love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness. Now, let me back up. Love of money can be a dangerous thing, can't it? Because why do we want more money, usually? Spend it on self. That's the point. That's really what he's saying right there. But he talks about those desiring to be rich. How many of you know people that have made a lot of money and lost their family, or lost their children, lost their husband, wife, lost their... And then covetousness. But what is covetousness? It is defined as idolatry, isn't it? But how would you define it? Pleonexia is the word that comes up so often, the Greek word that comes up so often in the Bible. What's it mean?
Owning something that somebody else had.
More.
There's a farmer in St. Florida that's been, you might have heard that he doesn't want all the land, he just wants what touches it.
What's connected to him? Good. As we said, covetousness is idolatry, Colossians 3:5. Put to death your members which are on earth, fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry. So money can become your what? Your God. It can become your idol. And that's the danger of it. And then Ephesians 5:3, but fornication and all uncleanness or covetousness, let it not even be named among you. Saints. So that shouldn't be a part of our lives. Sorcery, hatred, contempt, wrath, selfish ambitions, heresies. Philippians 2:3, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind let it. So often what happens, wealth tends to change the mind of a person. Here's someone who maybe didn't have much to start with. They were very humble, very meek, very, and start making money. And what happens? They won't more. You agree? On and on and on, bigger vacations. Many ones about covetousness and selfishness. The thing that you could put in that list, problems.
Just to note on that point, and it kind of bears on some of those. There, back to Ecclesiastes, chapter 5, verse 13. There's a story. It's kept for the owners.
Riches kept for the owners thereof. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Problem because of a lack of money. And this could be a great problem as well. First of all, poverty. How would you define poverty? Or what are some characteristics of poverty? Maybe that's what I should say. What's some characteristics of poverty? We understand poverty as being poor, possibly do without a lot of things, or along the but what are some characteristics of poverty?
Lack of necessities of life.
Lack of necessities, like hunger, or a home. What else? What?
Medical,
I can't hear you.
medical expenses.
Yes, yes, and I was getting that. And included in that inadequate child care. You know, I started on a medicine 2 years ago, it cost $10,000 a month. Actually, it's more than that. I'm glad I had insurance. If I didn't, guess what? I'd probably get it now. I'm not paying $10,000 a month. A pill to take 3 times a day. But if you're fortunate enough to have medical coverage, that is such a blessing. And to cover medicine and things of that nature. Unsafe neighborhoods, under-resourced schools, job stress, mental health concerns, social discrimination, stigma, lack of medical treatment, and divorce, which we mentioned earlier. Because money matters in marriage. And so, what are some of the causes then of poverty?
Not working,
Huh?
not working.
Not working, not willing to work?
Right.
Okay.
No self-control,
What?
no self-control with your progression.
No self-control, putting yourself in that situation. Don and I were talking the other day, he was telling me about a couple that he needed $1,000, $250,000 in credit card. And he said they both have great jobs. Works, did it? Didn't work. What else might be a source of poverty?
Disabilities.
What?
Disabilities.
That in a minute. What, somebody else said something? Sickness, okay. And that illness, you get sick, you're not able to work, or physical limitations, or mental limitations, things of that nature. Somebody else have to comment?
That group couple used to be friends with, that every time you pay, that's gonna be everything they want to do, what was left, we pay them bills. What happened today, their whole life, they just have stuff repossessed, and just, never quit, they always gonna get rich quick.
And a lot of people are like that when it comes to another aspect of money that we're going to get to hopefully, and that is giving to the Lord. Because they do exactly what you're talking about, take care of all their things first, and then if they have anything left over, well, we might give something to the Lord. But a lot of things can happen in life, and I have been so blessed in my life, I've never missed a paycheck. So it's hard for me to comprehend the horror that some people face in their life over financial problems and poverty. You go into work tomorrow and the boss says, guess what? We're moving the plant to Mexico. Do you want to go? We'll go down there and make $4 an hour. You're just out of a job, right? Or we're having a reduction in force, or we lost our contract from our biggest buyer, and so we're going to have to cut back. We're going to have to reduce our spending income. Those things would be absolutely horrible, wouldn't they? Yeah, many people deal with those.
Now, the plant, they wasted a lot, not only bankruptcy, they bring in, they, it's new technology, bring in machines.
Well, that's something else.
Yeah, you'll watch it.
Yeah, how many of you know what AI is? I've heard about AI for the last 2 weeks, so I'm not just joking. Artificial intelligence, talking about how many millions and millions of jobs will be done away by artificial intelligence. And it is so spooky and so scary that the people who've invented it have backed off from it. We don't know what we're going to face in the future as far as all of that is concerned. All right, envy is another problem. A person that may not have very much may be envious of those who do. Proverbs 14:13, a sound heart is life to the body, but envy is the rottenness of the bones. And certainly envy is a sin. It's listed in the works of the flesh in Galatians chapter 5, verse 21. Envy, murder, drunkenness, revelry, so on and so forth. So what is envy? We know what it is. Define it. What is envy?
Jealousy,
Huh?
jealousy is one part of it.
Well, yeah.
Jealousy, someone that-
Also about the same thing as coveting,
It's what?
about the same thing as coveting something.
Okay.
You're wanting something that
Well,
somebody else has got.
You just envy what
It's on
somebody
the other
else
end of the
has.
spectrum, but what?
You envy what somebody else got that you don't have.
Yeah. It's pretty much, it's the desire to have what others have and not be satisfied with what you have. Paul talked about that. We'll talk about that if we have time. Social ostracism, you reckon that's a part of the problem of being poor or losing your job or not being able to take care of yourself and your family the way you'd like to? Are you ostracized by those kind of things? Answer is absolutely. And I thought this was interesting. Luke 14, verses 13 to 14, when you give a feast, invite who? The poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind. And you will be blessed because they cannot do what? They lack repay. And so that can be a real problem. Many times people have slipped back financially and they get themselves in certain situations. You find that maybe people withdraw from you a little bit. And there's a social stigma involved in it. There's all kinds of problems involved with that in having a lack of money. But let's move on. What does the Bible say about acquiring money? First, I suggest to you that there's a need for integrity and hard work. I'd like for somebody to read this for me. Proverbs 28, verses 19 through 22. Proverbs 28, verses 19 through 22.
Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. A faithful man will abound with blessings, but whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. To show partiality is not good, but for a piece of bread a man will do wrong. A stingy man hastens after wealth and does not know that poverty will come upon him.
Good. There's a lot of aspects to this passage. And one of the things that we just talked about, the man will transgress for a piece of bread. One of the problems of poverty. But he who tills land will have plenty of bread. In other words, if you're willing to work, but he who follows frivolity will have poverty enough. There's a verse I didn't put in here. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. You remember that? One proverb said. What's the point? What's he saying about the ant? What should we observe about it? Work. Why are they working? Winter's coming. You watch those squirrels in the fall. Gather nuts. They get real busy. They start putting up rooms for winter, making through the winter. All right. Another thing is, the Bible says about acquiring money is to mind your own business. And 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 11 and 12, he says that we should aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind our own business, and to work with our own hands. In other words, to support ourselves, as we commanded you. Now, keep in mind that this society that he's writing to was a society based on manual labor. It wasn't based on the mind, where people made their money with their minds. I had a guy used to, at the church, every time I'd shake hands with him, he said, "Man, you got the softest hands." And I'd say, "But you want to feel my brain, there's calluses on them." So there's different kinds of work. And certainly, I think that's the message. We need to mind our own business, and we need to work. And then, work for contentment, not for wealth. Godliness with contentment is what? Great gain, Paul says to Timothy. We brought nothing into this world, what are we going to carry out? Absolutely. But
Dickie said, I'm going back to with us when we lay your property.
that's a good point.
I think
He goes on to say, with food and clothing, be content. I kind of like I guess above that. Like, you know. So, I wonder if we can even imagine the situation he found himself in, because he mentions also that he says, I have, and the word abase there is the word we've been in the penthouse and I've been in the mail. But I learned to do what, he says. You be content. So I think that's the great lesson for us. Okay, and then we're to have patience. Don't be in a hurry to get rich quickly. Proverbs 21:5. Somebody read that for me.
The plans of the diligent lead surely to advantage, but everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty.
Okay. So why should you work? Desire to be rich, fall into temptation and a snare, lust, drowning and destruction, perdition. Goes back to the statement I made earlier about people, and perhaps you've known, that have just focused on getting rich. That is their goal in life. But a lot of times when they set that goal, they forget about some other goals they had early on, like taking care of their family, being the kind of person God wants them to be. Their souls as a result of that.
There's an old saying, I spend all my health obtaining wealth, and then I spend all of my wealth trying to get my head.
Yeah. I also had another verse here. I think maybe I've used it somewhere else or will, but I want to go ahead and mention Romans 13, verse 8, and this is one of the verses I think he mentions in the book here. Owe no one anything except what? To love what? To love what?
Love one another.
One another. For he who loves one another has fulfilled the law. All right, that brings us to another point that I think is an important point, and that is how are Christians to use their money. And as we begin looking at that, obviously Christians need to use their money to provide for their family. 1 Timothy 5, verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his own household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And then the King James Version says. And so it is the responsibility of a person to provide for his own household. That's a fundamental task and responsibility of a person as far as using their money is concerned. Another principle you find in the Bible is this, that is, do not waste. Proverbs 21:17 says, he who loves pleasure will be a poor man. He who loves wine and oil will not get rich. Does that sound like people today? Pete?
I worked for a guy that didn't pay very much at all, took everybody out for lunch, and I had this big field there, he lit a cigarette with $100 bill. Set it on fire. That pretty much ways. Everybody there appreciated that because of cheap ranch.
I'm sure he impressed a lot of people did.
Why did Jesus take up the leftovers?
Yeah, and that's a good point, yeah, feeding by that. Yeah. Good. Proverbs 21:20. There is desirable treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man squanders it. Again, he's talking about waste. And certainly we shouldn't be wasteful people. I remember this probably 34 years ago. I was watching television and they were talking about a restaurant somewhere, I think it was New York, Paris, one of these big towns. And they made a cake and they covered it with a thin layer of gold. And people paid so much to buy a slice of that cake. And I don't know what you think about that, but the first thought out of my mind is that is sin. That is sin. Of no value to the body, may even hurt the body, I don't know. But it costs them a fortune. And, I'll go ahead and tell Judy, this is my 50-cent shirt. Good. We don't waste money on clothes. We do try to wear clothes. There's somebody in here that got shirts for 25 cents. I'm not going to tell you who it was. I know somebody. So, don't waste. And people get so wrapped up, and I guess I'm showing age, but I cannot understand why a person paid $100 for a pair of jeans that's been cut all to pieces. When I was a kid, Mama used to use those little iron-on things to cover those holes up. Y'all remember those? We didn't go to school with holes in their jeans. Those iron-on patches. But it's amazing to me, isn't it? Just the fact that you said, read them, said, wearing these Levi jeans. If that's what you want, that's your business. I can't go there. There's certain things I can't do. I could buy it in the morning, but I don't want to.
They don't like to go to the legs at all. Go leg out.
Yeah. It's true. Okay. And then another thing we find in the Bible, certainly the responsibility which Christians have to share with others and to help the poor. And by the way, I have 14 pages of verses on this point. Okay. 14 pages of verses on that sub-point. Before God the Father says to visit, that means to care for and to keep oneself in spite of the world. Proverbs 18, he who has pity on the poor lends to the poor, and he will pay back what has been given. Okay, and then response 16, verses 1 and 2, taking up a collection of saints, these saints in Jerusalem. 2 Corinthians 9:8, he talks about how God has given us blessings, allowed us to have certain things. And I put here Mark 12. Anybody know what that passage is about? Remember that offhand? Might. So my question then is this: does Jesus care what you put in the collection plate? It sure seems that he does. Now, this widow, did she give of her abundance or of her necessity?
Says all of her living.
All her living, 2 mites. By the way, that was the price of a dove. And a dove was a meal. That was the last meal, so to speak. She gave everything she had. Just this past Sunday, Colton was teaching about that tax collector. What was his name? Zacchaeus. And it appears from what he said, he was willing to give it all. That is just an absolutely amazing story. Compare that to the rich young ruler, who, when he was told to take what he had to give to the poor, what did he do? He went with someone. And then we need to learn to save. 2 Corinthians 12:14 says that children ought not live with parents for children. Certainly, there's nothing wrong with saving. People get upset about that, trying to find fault in some of these other scriptures. Christians in time of trouble over money, have your treasure and heart fixed on things that will last. Matthew chapter 6, 19 through 21. Do not lay up yourself treasure on earth where moth and rust does corrupt, and thieves break through and steal, but lay up yourself treasures in heaven where moth and rust does not corrupt, and thieves do not break through and steal. Now that does not mean that we don't need to lay up for ourselves. Because the sentence construction there is called a relative negation, where the second part is more important than the first part. It's kind of like 1 Peter 3 and 4, who's adoring, let it not be putting on of apparel. Does that mean you're not supposed to put on apparel? No, that's not what it means. There's something more important. It's not the outward adorning, plaiting your hair, where you go, putting on apparel, but the headband. So that you've got that relative negation construction. That's a different kind of figure. I guess we call it figure of speech. And then we need to think on spiritual things. You're familiar with Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. We're to serve God, Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. No man can serve two masters. Why would I include that verse in this passage? Because oftentimes the master becomes what? Money or mammon. No man can serve two masters, for he will hate the one, love the other, or he'll despise one and loyal to him. Cannot serve God and mammon. What's mammon? Material things, right? Okay. And then don't be anxious. Talks about that in Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7. We're familiar with that. And then Philippians 4, verses 11 through 13. We talked about that before. Paul said he learned whatever state he was in to be content. And then we need to learn to put God's kingdom first. That's what's the most important. So the conclusion of all this is we live in the greatest, most materially blessed nation on earth. And we probably complain about money more than any other nation on earth. And we waste more than any nation on earth. And if we can't afford something, we just borrow to pay for it. And go in debt. Don't allow money to steal your soul. That's the point I wanted to get to in this whole lesson. Don't allow money to steal your soul. What shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world, loses his own soul, or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Revelation 3:17, the way Isaiah said, I am rich and become wealthy and have need of nothing, and do not know that you're wretched, miserable, poor, and blind, and naked. Okay, thank you for your help with the lesson.
The song after the lesson is number 19 in the regular hymn book, Walking in Sunlight. I wanted to sing that song first tonight, but I chose this one after looking at what we were studying in the adult Bible class with Brother Frank. I thought this fit more with getting our heads and our thoughts thinking about heaven and not about the material things that we may have here on this earth. So we'll sing number 52, and then we'll have the words of encouragement. No soul, my heart can sing.
Have you ever heard of a war that ended, but the fighting continued? Battles that continued after victory was already declared. Conflicts throughout history where the losing side kept on fighting. It's happened a number of times. One instance in, I guess, relatively recent human history is after World War II. There are numerous examples of after Japan had surrendered, various Japanese soldiers and units kept on fighting. They refused to accept defeat. And American soldiers who were overseas, despite their victory, had to keep fighting just to come home. What I want to say tonight is that the same can be said of Christians. The same is true for us. The war has been won. If you look in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14, the writer of Hebrews, he writes, starting in verse 14, "Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise," speaking of Christ, "partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery." Jesus defeated the adversary. He won the fight against Satan, and through his death and resurrection, he gained the victory. As it says, he overcame death, he overcame the world, and he extends that same victory to us. Paul writes about this in 1 Corinthians. If you want to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul writes starting in verse 55, "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." Because Christ won the war for us, we can be the victors as well. Or, because we can be the victors, there's an opposite side to that, right? Or we could be the losers. In fact, I used to be. We all were we not? "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God," Romans 3:23. We have all fought against God. Paul also writes in Romans chapter 5, "For while we were still weak, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would even dare to die. But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since therefore we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. More than that, we also rejoice in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation." I was an enemy of God, but I surrendered, and I've been reconciled to God. Now I am on the side that won the war. The thing is, the fight is not over. If you would, please turn to Revelation. And we know the book of Revelation is a record of the vision that was given to John. And God revealed this to John, the scene in chapter 12. John records that the dragon in this scene is Satan. So what I want to draw from looking at this passage is see what we can learn from the character of Satan. What is he really like? Especially when it comes to losing. Revelation chapter 12, verse 7, "And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war, and they did not prevail. And there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." And now go to verse 13. "And when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the two wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place, where she was nourished for a time, times, and half a time, away from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent hurled water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with a flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river which the dragon had hurled out of his mouth. So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus." What do we learn about the character of Satan just from reading what was revealed to John? Satan is not just a loser, he is a sore loser. He won't be surrendering to Jesus. He will try every trick that he can think of to trip us up, to pull us back to his side, the losing side, and to keep us there. For this reason, we need to watch out. 1 Peter 5, verse 8, Peter says, "Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." So what do we do with our adversary, the devil? How do we protect ourselves? Put on the full armor of God, right? Ephesians chapter 6, verse 11, "Put on the full armor of God so that you may be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places." We need the full armor of God in order to fight this spiritual battle. But I'm not going to go in depth on the armor of God because that's really not what this invitation is about. The point is, whose side are we on? Whose side are you on? This is a decision we all have to make. Do we choose to be a winner, or do we choose to be a loser? Either way, we're going to fight. Think about that. There is no neutral side in this spiritual war. You are either fighting God or you are fighting Satan. Some of us have already decided which side we are on, and some of us still have to decide. So to those who have yet to decide which side you choose, I want to make something clear. This is not, this phrasing is not something that I came up with. If you're familiar with Chris Emerson, who preaches in Texas, this is what he summarized, and I think it's very helpful to me. Fighting God is easy, but you're guaranteed to lose. Fighting Satan is hard, but you're guaranteed to win. Because the war has already been won, as we've said. Jesus did all the heavy lifting for us. He gained the victory, and he extends that victory to us. But we find ourselves behind enemy lines still. We have to fight our way back home. And we definitely want to make it back home. You know why? Because the war is won, and just like back in World War II, when victory was declared, people started celebrating. There's a celebration being prepared that's going to last for eternity. I don't want to miss that. Do you? If you have been fighting against God and you need to surrender, this is the invitation to do so. You can become victorious by surrendering to God through baptism. So please, if anyone has need, come forward as we stand and as we sing.
Walking in sunlight on my journey.